そうな匂いがする。
これ全部食べ物屋よ。
いません。どなたかいませんか。
千尋の
お父さんがついてるんだから。カードも財布も。
The tunnel breathes before she does. Damp air presses against Chihiro's face as the car stops, cicadas screaming behind them like a warning nobody listens to. Her parents laugh it off, already stepping forward, already wrong. The entrance yawns wide and dark, stone mouth waiting. Chihiro hesitates. Something about this place feels unfinished, like it swallowed people and never bothered to spit them back out. They walk through the tunnel, and the world changes texture. Light thins, sound dulls. Their footsteps echo too loudly, like the ground is hollow underneath. On the other side sits an abandoned town frozen mid-breath. Food stalls overflow with steaming dishes, glistening meat, bowls still warm. No vendors, no voices. Just the smell, rich, sweet, impossible. Chihiro's stomach knots. This isn't abandoned. It's paused. Her parents don't notice. They never do. They dive into the food like they've been starving for years, laughing with mouths full, grease on their fingers. Chihiro backs away, heart racing, a pressure building behind her eyes. Don't eat it. The thought comes sharp and sudden. She doesn't know why. She just knows. Then the light shifts. The sky darkens too fast, like someone flipped a switch. Lanterns flicker on by themselves. Water creeps back into the empty streets, flooding pathways that were dry moments ago. Buildings stretch taller, shadows bending wrong. Chihiro turns to call her parents and freezes. They're gone. No, they're still there. But they're not her parents anymore. Two massive pigs stand where her mother and father were, snorting, shoving their faces into the food, eyes dull and empty. Chihiro's scream catches in her throat. Her knees buckle. This isn't fear anymore. This is reality snapping in half. She runs. The town comes alive as night settles. Doors slide open. Shapes move behind paper walls. Spirits spill into the streets, towering silhouettes, drifting masks, creatures stitched from smoke and hunger. Chihiro stumbles through them, invisible hands brushing past her, voices murmuring in languages she doesn't know but somehow understands. You don't belong! You don't belong! Her body starts to fade. Hands become transparent. Legs weaken. Panic claws up her spine as the world literally lets go of her. She's disappearing, forgotten, erased. Tears blur her vision until a voice cuts through the noise. Eat this. A boy stands beside her, calm where everything else is chaos. Dark hair, steady eyes. He presses a small piece of food into her trembling hands. Chihiro doesn't trust it. She doesn't trust anything. But she eats, and the world grabs her back. Flesh solidifies. Breath returns. She sobs, gulping air like she's been underwater too long. The boy doesn't comfort her. He instructs her. This is a bathhouse for spirits. You don't exist here unless you work. If they realize you're human, you're finished. Her parents can be saved, but only if she survives first. He tells her to remember her name. Names matter here. Lose it, and you lose yourself. Then he's gone. Chihiro stands alone again, shaking, staring up at the towering bathhouse glowing gold against the night sky. It pulses with life. Steam pours from its windows like breath from a sleeping beast. Somewhere inside, monsters soak, workers scurry, rules rule everything. She steps inside. The air is thick with heat and command. Floors creak under hurried feet. Creatures bark orders, drag supplies, slam doors. Chihiro is shoved, ignored, nearly crushed by the flow until she reaches the center of it all. A towering staircase leads upward, and at the top waits something worse than any monster she's seen. Yubaba. Her voice booms before Chihiro even sees her. A wall of smoke, jewels, sharp nails, and sharper eyes. Power radiates from her like heat from a furnace. Chihiro begs, pleads. Her words tumble over each other, desperation bare and humiliating. Yubaba laughs. She doesn't say no. That would be merciful. She says work comes with a price. A contract slides forward. Ink waits. The girl's name is taken, twisted, reduced. Chihiro becomes Sen, shorter, smaller, easier to forget. The paper seals itself. Somewhere in the bathhouse, pigs grunt in the dark. Somewhere in this world, a boy watches from the shadows, knowing what she doesn't yet understand. Getting her parents back was never the hardest part. Surviving this place is. Morning doesn't arrive gently in the bathhouse. It crashes in with shouting, stomping feet, and the slap of wet towels against stone. Sen wakes on a thin mat in a cramped worker's room, heart already racing like she's late for something important. Because she is. Here, if you stop moving, you disappear. She barely has time to stand before she's shoved into the river of labor. Buckets thrust into her hands, orders screamed in her face. Creatures of every shape surge past. Frog-like clerks counting coins, soot-black sprites scrambling underfoot, towering workers with arms like tree trunks. Nobody explains anything. They don't need to. Confusion is part of the job. Sen scrubs floors until her hands sting raw. She slips on wet stone, bites back tears, forces herself up again. Around her, laughter cuts sharp and cruel. This place feeds on weakness. She feels it. Smells it in the steam. Fear has a scent here. Then the bell rings. A spirit arrives. The doors groan open and something enormous lumbers inside, dragging rot with it. The stink hits first mud, decay, something dead too long in water. Workers scatter. Whispers ripple. A stink spirit. Nobody wants it. Nobody refuses it. Yubaba's rule is absolute. Every guest must be served. Sen is pushed forward. Her knees shake as she's handed towels and soap. The spirit lowers itself into the bath, water turning black instantly. Sen gags, fighting the urge to run. But running isn't an option anymore. She steps closer. Scrubs. The filth doesn't come off. It clings, thick and endless, like the spirit is made of garbage and pain. Something hard presses against her hand. She pauses, reaches deeper. Her fingers close around a thorn embedded in the spirit's side. Rusted, tangled, wrong. Sen pulls. The bath explodes. Trash erupts from the spirit like a broken dam. Bicycles, pipes, sludge, years of human waste spill free as the creature roars, then shudders. The filth drains away, revealing not a monster, but a massive river spirit, clean and radiant, eyes gentle with relief. Silence. Then chaos. Gold rains down. Workers cheer. Yubaba's eyes gleam, calculating faster than joy ever could. Sen stands soaked and shaking as the river spirit bows to her, leaving behind a bitter medicine pellet before vanishing into steam. For the first time, the bathhouse looks at her differently. Not kind, not safe, but aware. That night, exhaustion crushes her bones. Sen collapses outside, gulping cool air by the river. The bathhouse looms behind her, glowing and hungry. She pulls out the medicine, unsure why she hasn't swallowed it already. A shadow shifts beside her. Haku. He sits quietly, watching the water flow past, moonlight breaking across his face. He warns her about the bathhouse, about Yubaba, about how she steals names to steal control. Sen touches the place in her chest where her real name used to live. It already feels far away. Haku stiffens. The water ripples. Something moves beneath the surface. Silent, deliberate. A presence slides closer, darker than night. No face emerges. At first, it's harmless. A mask, a shape. It stands there, dripping, empty eyes fixed on Sen. She offers it nothing. Not food, not fear. It lingers anyway. Inside the bathhouse, no face finds the workers. Gold appears in its hands, endless, shining. The bathhouse erupts into frenzy. Greed ignites faster than fire. Workers crowd around No Face, feeding it, praising it, stuffing it with food and attention. With every bite, it grows. With every coin, it swells. Its voice multiplies, echoing with stolen hunger. Sen watches in horror as the place transforms. Laughter turns shrill. Eyes glaze over. Even the walls seem to lean closer, eager. No Face devours without stopping, swallowing workers whole, spitting out gold that no longer feels like reward but bait. Haku rushes past her, injured, bleeding. Paper talismans tear at his body, slicing through the air like knives. He crashes into Sen, collapsing. Blood stains her hands. Real blood. Warm. Don't tell anyone, he whispers. Trust no one. Then he's gone again, fleeing into the night, hunted. The bathhouse shakes as No Face grows monstrous, screaming with 100 voices. Yubaba roars orders from above. Panic spreads. Sen stands frozen between it all. The greed, the danger, the rules she barely understands. She clutches the medicine. Somewhere inside, she knows. This isn't about gold, or monsters, or work. It's about remembering who you are when everything around you tells you to become something else. And the night is far from over. No-Face is still growing when Sen realizes she can't stay still anymore. The bathhouse trembles with its weight, floors groaning, lanterns swinging like they're trying to escape the ceiling. Workers scatter, screaming, gold coins skittering uselessly across the tiles. What once felt powerful now looks sick, bloated, empty. Sen runs toward it anyway. Her feet slap against wet stone as No-Face turns, its mask cracking open to reveal a mouth that isn't really a mouth, just hunger shaped like one. Voices pour out, pleading, laughing, crying, all the sounds of people who wanted something too badly and paid for it. She doesn't offer gold. She offers the medicine. No-Face recoils when Sen forces it into its grasp. It hesitates, confused, then swallows. The effect is immediate. Its body convulses. The voices scream. Workers spill back out onto the floor, coughing, alive. No-Face retches, shrinking with every heave until it's just a trembling shadow again, collapsed and quiet. The bathhouse exhales, but Sen doesn't get relief. She gets responsibility. No-Face follows her. It trails behind her like a lost child, dripping water, silent now. It doesn't ask. It doesn't threaten. It just stays close, as if Sen is the only solid thing left in its world. She doesn't know what to do with that. She barely knows what to do with herself. Then, Yubaba strikes back. Sen is summoned to the top floor, legs heavy, heart pounding. Yubaba lounges amid pillows and jewels, eyes sharp as blades. She doesn't yell. That's worse. She smiles. She tells Sen that Haku stole something precious, something unforgivable, and now he's dying for it. The words hit harder than any scream. Yubaba makes an offer. Save Haku or save her parents. Choose. Sen doesn't cry. She doesn't beg. She feels something settle inside her instead, heavy and unmovable. She will do both. Somehow. Yubaba laughs again, amused, already convinced she's won. Sen runs. She finds Haku barely conscious, bleeding, breath shallow. His body shudders as if fighting itself. Sen remembers the river spirit, the thorn, the way pain hid something trapped. She grips Haku's shoulders, voice shaking but firm, and calls his name. Haku! His eyes flicker. She feeds him the rest of the medicine. He convulses violently, arching back as something dark forces its way out. Black sludge, writhing paper seals, spells ripping free. Sen holds on, terrified he'll vanish, terrified she'll forget him. The filth spills away, and Haku collapses, breathing again. But when he wakes, confusion clouds his face. I don't remember, he whispers. The name is gone. They escape the bathhouse together, carried by a soot-covered train that glides across a flooded world. No-Face sits quietly beside Sen, no longer monstrous, just empty and tired. The train passes submerged houses, lampposts half drowned, a world that feels forgotten by time itself. At Zenoba's cottage, warmth replaces fear. Tea is poured, food is shared. No-Face helps with chores, gentle now, content with simple things. Sen feels something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Belonging. Zenoba tells her the truth gently. Haku's real name was stolen long ago. That's why he's trapped. That's why he serves Yubaba. Names are anchors. Without them, you drift until someone tells you who to be. Sen remembers. A river, clear water rushing past her childhood home, falling, being saved. She looks at Haku, eyes widening. Kohaku River, she whispers. You're the spirit of the Kohaku River. The name lands like a spark. Haku gasps. His body glows. Memory floods back all at once. Freedom, water, sky. He smiles. Real this time. Alive. Sty. They fly. The wind screams past as Haku transforms, carrying Sen through clouds, faster than fear. The bathhouse rises ahead, massive and waiting. This time, Sen doesn't feel small. Yubaba's final test waits inside. Rows of pigs snort and grunt in a pen. Sen's heart pounds as she scans them, searching for something familiar. Yubaba smirks. Choose correctly, and your parents go free. Sen closes her eyes. These aren't my parents. She knows it, feels it, says it. The contract shatters. The bathhouse loosens its grip. Morning light spills in, soft and forgiving. Sen runs through the tunnel again, heart steady this time. On the other side, her parents wait, human and confused, unaware of how close they came to being lost forever. The tunnel seals behind them. Grass sways. Cicadas sing. The world looks ordinary again, but Sen glances back once more. She remembers her name. And that makes all the difference. The bathhouse doesn't fight Sen anymore. It watches her. Morning light creeps across the floors as she walks back inside, footsteps steady, spine straight. Workers pause. Whispers follow. Not fear this time. Recognition. She isn't just a scared human girl anymore. She's someone who walked out and came back. Yubaba waits. Her office feels smaller now, cluttered with gold that suddenly looks dull. The witch's smile doesn't reach her eyes. She circles Sen slowly, nails clicking, sniffing for weakness. She offers rewards, then threats, then rules twisted until they almost make sense. Sen doesn't interrupt. She lets the words pass like steam. "I'm leaving," Sen says quietly, "with my parents." For the first time, Yubaba hesitates. Rules are power here, and Sen has learned them. The contract loosens, ink fading like a bad memory. Yubaba snaps her fingers, furious but bound. A promise made must be honored. The bathhouse groans as if disappointed, as if losing a favorite toy. Haku waits outside, whole again. He smiles, softer than before, carrying the weight of knowing who he is and who he can never be again. The Kohaku River is gone. Paved over, forgotten. His freedom came too late. They fly together one last time. The air feels different when you know it's goodbye. Clouds part gently. Below them, the bathhouse shrinks, all its magic suddenly fragile. Haku tells Sen she mustn't look back once she leaves. Memory is a bridge. Turn around too long, and you never really cross. She nods, but her chest aches. They land near the tunnel. Sunlight spills through trees. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary world. Sen steps down, heart thudding. Haku smiles again, fading already, wind pulling at him like a tide. "Don't forget me," he says. "I won't," she answers. And she means it. She walks through the tunnel. Each step feels heavier than the last. The air grows warmer. The darkness thins. She doesn't turn around. Not when she hears a splash. Not when she feels the pull of something calling her name. On the other side, her parents stretch, annoyed, checking the car like nothing happened. The ruins behind them crumble, grass reclaiming stone. Time snaps back into place. The tunnel is gone. Sen stands there, quiet, older somehow. The world hasn't changed, but she has. She knows now how easily comfort becomes a trap, how hunger can hollow you out, how remembering who you are can save more than just yourself. As they drive away, wind lifts her hair. For a moment, she thinks she sees a flash of white in the river below, a ripple, a memory. She smiles. Some worlds don't disappear. They wait. The road hums beneath the tires, steady and unremarkable, but Sen can't relax into it. The ordinary world feels thinner now, like paper held up to light. Trees blur past. Her parents argue about directions, about nothing that matters. They don't notice the silence she carries. They don't hear the bathhouse breathing behind her eyes. She presses her forehead to the cool window. Every bump in the road shakes loose a memory. Steam curling upward, the weight of buckets in her hands. Gold clattering across stone like rain that burned when it touched skin. And Haku, flying, smiling, disappearing. The ache tightens in her chest. Not sharp. Heavy. The kind you live with. At a red light, Sen looks down at her hands. They're clean now. No cracks. No burns. But she remembers how they felt raw. How each movement hurt. How she kept going anyway. Something about that refuses to fade. She realizes with a quiet shock that she doesn't want it to. Pain taught her who she could be. The light turns green. Her parents talk about lunch. The town they pass through looks normal. Too normal. Convenience stores. Power lines. A river running narrow and straight, boxed in by concrete. Sen's breath catches. She leans forward, staring hard at the water as they cross a bridge. Nothing stirs. Still, she whispers a thank you under her breath, just in case. That night, sleep doesn't come easily. When it does, it brings half-dreams. Lantern light flickering on walls. Footsteps echoing in endless halls. The soft Hayao Miyazaki didn't set out to make Spirited Away as a grand statement or a carefully engineered hit. He made it because he was irritated. Irritated by how children were being spoken to, by how stories for young audiences had become either overly sweet or aggressively moral. At the turn of the millennium, Miyazaki was already a towering figure in Japanese animation, but he was also restless. After Princess Mononoke nearly broke him physically and emotionally, he had announced his retirement. That didn't last. Creative people like Miyazaki don't retire, they simmer. Spirited Away emerged from that simmering frustration, shaped by instinct rather than committee, and driven by a singular question: what kind of story does a 10-year-old girl actually need? By 2001, Miyazaki had built a reputation as an auteur in the purest sense. Films like My Neighbor Totoro, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and Princess Mononoke carried his fingerprints everywhere: environmental anxiety, moral ambiguity, fierce empathy for the vulnerable. But Spirited Away marks a pivot. Where Mononoke was epic and confrontational, this film turns inward. Smaller stakes. Quieter moments. A child at its center who isn't special, isn't chosen, isn't destined for greatness. Chihiro is scared, sulky, impatient. That's the point. Miyazaki wanted a protagonist who felt real, not inspirational. Someone who earns growth rather than having it bestowed upon her. The film's creative genesis is famously loose, almost anti-industrial. There was no finished script at the start of production. Miyazaki storyboarded as he went, responding to what felt emotionally honest rather than what fit a pre-approved outline. This method terrifies studios. For Studio Ghibli, it had become tradition. Miyazaki believed that locking a story too early killed its soul, especially when telling a story about transformation. Children change unpredictably. The film mirrors that rhythm. Scenes wander. Encounters feel incidental. And yet, the emotional trajectory remains razor-sharp, guided by intuition rather than formula. What sparked the story itself is deceptively simple. Miyazaki spent time observing the daughters of his friends. Girls on the edge of adolescence, bored, cynical, unimpressed by fantasy tailored for them. He noticed how little modern storytelling respected their inner lives. So he built a world that doesn't flatter its heroine. The Spirit Bathhouse isn't a playground. It's hostile, bureaucratic, exhausting. Survival depends on work, patience, and attention. Magic exists, but it doesn't solve problems for free. That worldview comes straight from Miyazaki's philosophy. Growth is quiet, incremental, and often uncomfortable. Studio Ghibli's role here is crucial. By 2001, the studio had earned enough cultural capital to protect Miyazaki's instincts. There was no pressure to add comic relief, no insistence on marketable sidekicks, no demand for clear villains. Yubaba is monstrous, yes, but also tired, petty, and oddly domestic. Even the spirits who threaten Chihiro often reveal loneliness rather than malice. This moral complexity reflects Miyazaki's lifelong resistance to binary thinking. Good and evil bore him. Systems, environments, and human weakness interest him far more. Visually, Miyazaki's vision was rooted in nostalgia without sentimentality. The bathhouse draws from Edo period architecture, post-war Japanese consumer culture, and half-remembered childhood spaces. It feels specific without being locatable. That ambiguity is intentional. Miyazaki often spoke about liminal spaces, places between states, between worlds, and Spirited Away lives entirely in that in-between. Childhood and adulthood, tradition and modernity, work and identity. Even the title gestures toward erasure and rebirth, toward the terror of losing one's name in order to survive. What makes Miyazaki's direction here so distinctive is restraint. He trusts stillness. He lets trains glide across flooded plains with no dialogue, no plot advancement, just mood. Those moments aren't indulgent, they're philosophical. Miyazaki believes that contemplation is part of storytelling, especially for young viewers. He once said that children understand far more than adults give them credit for, as long as you're honest. Spirited Away never talks down. It invites viewers to feel their way through uncertainty, just as Chihiro does. This vision would shape every aspect of the film, from its fragmented structure to its refusal to explain everything. And that's precisely why it endures. But vision alone isn't enough. To understand how Spirited Away sustains coherence, despite its dreamlike flow, you have to look at how the story itself was constructed, moment by moment, instinct by instinct, inside Miyazaki's evolving creative process. If Miyazaki's vision was instinctual, the way Spirited Away found its story was even more so. There was no novel to adapt, no myth to retell beat by beat, no rigid outline pinned to a corkboard. This was an original screenplay in the purest sense, written in fragments, revised in motion, and constantly reshaped by what the film seemed to ask for as it grew. Miyazaki didn't just write the story, he listened to it. That approach explains why the narrative feels less like a traditional quest, and more like lived experience, full of detours, pauses, and moments that don't announce their importance until much later. The earliest version of the story was radically different. Miyazaki initially imagined a group of young girls as the focus, inspired by vacation trips and idle boredom. That didn't last. He quickly realized that a group diffuses responsibility. Someone else can always act. A single child has no such luxury. By narrowing the story to Chihiro alone, Miyazaki locked the audience inside her perspective. Every fear becomes immediate. Every mistake carries weight. The screenplay adjusts itself around that choice, shedding spectacle in favor of intimacy. The bathhouse doesn't feel overwhelming because it's grand. It feels overwhelming because Chihiro doesn't understand how it works. Structurally, Spirited Away resists the clean arcs of Western screenwriting. There's no clear call to adventure speech, no triumphant midpoint victory, no single antagonist to defeat. Instead, the film unfolds episodically, like a child's memory of a confusing summer where events blur but emotions remain sharp. Miyazaki builds progression through labor rather than conquest. Chihiro grows not by winning, but by showing up on time, doing unpleasant tasks, and learning how systems exploit the powerless. That's a bold storytelling choice for a family film, and it's deeply political, even if it never announces itself as such. Dialogue plays a surprisingly minimal role. Characters speak when necessary, not to explain themselves. Miyazaki trusts behavior more than words. Yubaba's cruelty is conveyed through contracts and casual threats. Kamaji's guarded kindness emerges through routine, not confession. Haku's mystery lingers because he withholds information rather than dumping exposition. This restraint gives the screenplay texture. Silence becomes part of the language. The story breathes in the gaps where another film would rush to clarify. One of the screenplay's most daring moves is its refusal to explain the rules of the world in advance. Viewers learn how the spirit realm works the same way Chihiro does, by making mistakes and suffering consequences. Names can be stolen, parents can be lost, contracts are binding. None of this is introduced with fanfare. It simply happens. That uncertainty is the engine of tension. You're not waiting for a villain to strike, you're waiting to see what invisible rule will be violated next. The film's pacing reflects this philosophy. Scenes stretch when emotion demands it and compress when information doesn't matter. The infamous train sequence, nearly wordless, floating through a submerged landscape, doesn't advance the plot in any traditional sense. But narratively, it's essential. It allows the audience to process what Chihiro has endured and prepares them for what she must still face. Miyazaki understands that story momentum isn't about speed, it's about readiness. There were constant revisions during production. Storyboards were discarded, rewritten, redrawn. Characters evolved midstream. No-Face, now one of the film's most iconic figures, expanded far beyond his initial conception. He wasn't designed as a metaphor from the start. He became one through accumulation, through observing how he behaved in different narrative spaces. Excess makes him monstrous. Simplicity calms him. The screenplay discovers its themes by watching its characters act, not by assigning them symbolic roles up front. What keeps this fluid process from collapsing into chaos is Miyazaki's moral compass. Even when the story wanders, it never loses sight of what it's about: identity, labor, and empathy in a world that strips both away. Chihiro's goal isn't escape alone, it's self-recognition. The screenplay reinforces this by constantly threatening her name, her agency, her memory. Forget who you are, and you disappear. Remember, and you endure. That idea surfaces again and again, sometimes gently, sometimes cruelly. Crucially, the script never flatters its audience with easy lessons. Growth isn't rewarded immediately. Kindness doesn't guarantee safety. Good intentions fail. Chihiro saves Haku, but not through bravery alone, through attention, care, and remembering something he forgot about himself. The writing insists that salvation is collaborative. You don't escape systems alone. You survive them by forming fragile alliances within them. This organic, risk-heavy approach to storytelling could only work under a director willing to trust ambiguity. And it required a cast capable of inhabiting characters who weren't defined by dialogue or plot mechanics, but by tone, rhythm, and emotional precision. Because once the script loosened its grip on explanation, performance became everything. Casting Spirited Away wasn't about star power or marketability. It was about finding voices that felt lived in, voices that sounded like people you might overhear on a train or behind a shop counter. Miyazaki has always treated voice acting as an extension of character psychology rather than performance bravura, and here that philosophy sharpens. Because the film's world is so fluid, so resistant to explanation, the voices had to ground it. They had to feel real enough that the unreal could exist around them without collapsing into noise. Chihiro was the most delicate decision of all. Miyazaki didn't want a voice actor voice. No exaggerated cuteness, no precocious charm. He wanted awkwardness, hesitation, a child who complains, sulks, and drags her feet when scared. The role went to Rumi Hiragai, who was still a teenager herself. That mattered. You can hear it in the performance. The breaths are uneven, the line reading sometimes clipped or rushed, like a kid speaking before she's figured out how to articulate what she's feeling. Chihiro doesn't sound heroic, she sounds tired. And that exhaustion becomes the foundation of her growth. Miyazaki has often said that children in animation are usually written as ideals rather than realities. This casting choice pushes directly against that tradition. Hiiragi's voice allows Chihiro to be unpleasant at times without alienating us. She whines, she snaps, she freezes. But because the voice feels authentic, those flaws read as vulnerability rather than annoyance. The audience doesn't admire Chihiro at first. They recognize her. That recognition is what makes her transformation credible. Haku required a very different energy. His voice needed calm, but not warmth, guidance, but not authority. Miyu Ireno delivers something almost ethereal, measured, restrained, faintly distant. Haku often sounds like he's holding something back, and that's exactly right. The casting reinforces his dual nature, protector and prisoner, guide and lost child. There's a softness there that contrasts with his moments of sudden ferocity, and that contrast carries enormous narrative weight once his identity begins to surface. Yubaba, meanwhile, could have tipped into caricature. A lesser film would have leaned into shrill villainy. Instead, Mari Natsuki plays her with sharp intelligence and theatrical bite. She's cruel, yes, but she's also bored, managerial, irritated by inefficiency. Listen to how she barks orders. This isn't fantasy villain dialogue, it's corporate language filtered through a fairy tale lens. That choice reframes Yubaba not as a monster to defeat, but as a system to endure. The casting makes that distinction clear without spelling it out. The brilliance of Natsuki's performance becomes even clearer when she voices Zeniba as well. Same voice, different rhythm, different emotional temperature. Zeniba isn't kinder because she's good, she's kinder because she's patient. The dual casting underlines one of the film's core ideas. Power doesn't corrupt by nature, it exhausts. Yubaba and Zeniba aren't opposites, they're variations shaped by environment. That insight lands because the casting allows us to hear the difference rather than be told about it. Then there's No Face, a character defined almost entirely by absence, minimal vocalization, sparse, unsettling sounds. When he does speak, it's fragmented, borrowed, hollow. The casting here is less about who voices him and more about restraint, knowing when not to. No Face absorbs voices the way he absorbs desire, mirroring the people around him without understanding why. That blankness could have felt gimmicky. Instead, it's unnerving because it's quiet. The absence becomes expressive. Kamaji and Lin round out the emotional spine of the ensemble. Kamaji's gruff delivery hides a surprising gentleness, the kind that emerges through routine rather than confession. Lin's voice, sharp and pragmatic, gives Chihiro something she desperately needs, an example of survival without cruelty. Neither character is written as a mentor in the traditional sense. The casting reflects that. They don't inspire speeches, they offer instructions. Work here. Don't mess up. Eat this. Keep moving. That's how help actually looks in hostile systems. What's remarkable is how cohesive the ensemble feels despite the sheer number of characters. Spirits drift in and out, each with a distinct presence, yet none feel like distractions. That coherence comes from Miyazaki's insistence on naturalistic delivery. Even the most bizarre designs are paired with grounded voices. The result is a world that feels populated rather than decorated. Casting in animation often goes unnoticed because there's no physical performance to analyze. Spirited Away proves how false that assumption is. These voices don't just accompany the images, they stabilize them. They give emotional gravity to a story that refuses to hold the viewer's hand. And because the script withholds explanation, performance becomes the primary guide through uncertainty. Which brings us to the heart of the film. Because once the right voices were in place, the question wasn't whether the characters worked, but how deeply they could carry us through their internal journeys, especially Chihiro. Especially her slow, painful, quietly earned transformation. Chihiro doesn't arrive as a hero. She arrives irritated, scared, and emotionally closed off, and Rumi Hiragai plays every one of those qualities without softening them for likability. That's the first bold move of Spirited Away's central performance. In her opening scenes, Chihiro slumps, drags her feet, complains under her breath. Her voice carries the weight of a child being pulled through a life change she didn't choose. No dramatic cues. No cinematic signaling that this is the beginning of greatness. Just discomfort. And that honesty becomes the bedrock of everything that follows. What makes Hiragi's performance remarkable isn't volume or range, it's calibration. Early on, Chihiro speaks quickly when anxious, as if rushing through words might get her out of the moment faster. When fear hits, her voice tightens rather than rises. She doesn't scream often, she freezes. That choice matters. Fear here isn't explosive, it's paralyzing. You hear it in the pauses, the swallowed words, the moments where Chihiro almost speaks and doesn't. This is a child learning that silence can be safer than protest. As Chihiro begins working in the bathhouse, something subtle shifts. Not confidence, competence. Hiragi adjusts the rhythm of her delivery. Fewer complaints, more listening. When she says, "I'll do it," there's still fear in her voice, but now it's layered with resolve. That evolution happens so gradually, you barely register it until you look back. Miyazaki doesn't give her a triumphant declaration scene because growth here isn't cinematic, it's procedural. You get better by doing the work again tomorrow. One of the film's most powerful performance moments comes during Chihiro's encounter with the polluted river spirit. There's no heroic posture, no swelling music telling you this is a turning point. Chihiro simply keeps pulling. Her breathing grows heavy. Her voice strains, not with bravery, but with effort. She doesn't know she's about to succeed. She's just refusing to stop. Hiragi sells that exhaustion completely. You feel how close Chihiro is to giving up, and how choice, not destiny, keeps her moving. Opposite her, Miyu Irano's Haku operates on restraint. Where Chihiro's voice is reactive, Haku's is controlled to the point of fragility. He speaks softly, almost too softly, like someone afraid of being overheard by the world itself. That choice reframes him. He isn't confident because he's powerful, he's careful because he's trapped. Irino lets the tension sit beneath the surface. Even in moments of guidance, there's a slight hesitation, as if Haku is editing himself in real time. That restraint pays off during Haku's moments of crisis. When his composure breaks, when his voice sharpens or cracks, it lands with disproportionate force because you're not used to hearing it. There's a scene where his physical transformation turns violent, and Irino's vocal shift mirrors that loss of control. Calm fractures into urgency. Precision gives way to pain. You hear someone fighting to hold on to an identity that's slipping through his fingers. It's not just acting, it's narrative embodiment. Mari Natsuki's dual performance as Yubaba and Zeniba offers a masterclass in contrast through tone alone. Yubaba's voice is sharp, nasal, constantly in motion. She interrupts herself. She interrupts others. Everything about her delivery suggests a mind juggling too many plates and resenting every second of it. This isn't evil cackling, it's managerial cruelty. Natsuki understands that power often expresses itself through impatience rather than rage. Zeniba, by contrast, moves slowly. Her voice settles into spaces instead of dominating them. The words themselves aren't radically different, but the pauses are. Where Yubaba weaponizes speech, Zeniba uses it to make room. Hearing the same actor embody both roles forces the audience to confront an uncomfortable idea. The difference between tyrant and caretaker isn't essence, it's environment. Performance makes that philosophy audible. No Face is the film's most unsettling presence precisely because he isn't performed in the conventional sense. His voice fragmented, borrowed, hollow functions like an echo chamber of desire. When he mimics others, it sounds wrong, like language worn without understanding. That wrongness isn't loud, it's off-kilter. And when No Face finally quiets, when his voice reduces to something almost childlike, the relief is palpable. Silence becomes character development. Kamaji's performance grounds the film emotionally in a way that's easy to overlook. His gruff delivery masks careful attention. He speaks like someone who's been doing the same job forever and learned not to expect gratitude. But listen closely, and you hear concern leaking through irritation. He pretends not to care. The voice betrays him. That contradiction makes Kamaji feel real. More real than many protagonists in louder films. Lin's voice performance provides Chihiro with a blueprint for survival. She's not nurturing, she's not cruel, she's efficient. Her clipped delivery, her impatience with sentiment, teaches Chihiro that kindness doesn't always look gentle. Sometimes, it looks like telling someone to toughen up because that's how they'll make it through the day. The performance refuses to soften that edge, and the film is stronger for it. What ties all these performances together is Miyazaki's refusal to chase emotional extremes. No one is allowed to oversell. No one underlines their feelings. The actors trust the audience to listen. That trust creates intimacy. You lean in, you pay attention, and in doing so, you experience the character's growth, not as spectacle, but as recognition. By the end, Chihiro hasn't become fearless. She hasn't become extraordinary. Her voice is still small, but it's steady. When she speaks, she knows why she's speaking. That's the transformation. Not from weakness to strength, but from confusion to clarity. And it lands because the performance earns every inch of that ground. Yet even the most carefully calibrated performances don't exist in isolation. They're shaped, amplified, and sometimes challenged by the characters around them. To understand how Spirited Away sustains emotional richness across its entire runtime, you have to look beyond the leads, into the strange, crowded, beautifully balanced ensemble that gives this world its pulse. What gives Spirited Away its emotional density isn't just Chihiro's journey. It's the ecosystem of characters orbiting her, each one reflecting a different way of surviving within the same unforgiving system. This is an ensemble that never feels ornamental. Every supporting character serves a function, not just narratively, but philosophically. They're not there to help Chihiro become special. They're there to show her what adulthood can look like, for better and worse. Take Lin. She's the first real human connection Chihiro makes in the bathhouse, and she's deliberately rough around the edges. Lin doesn't reassure. She doesn't explain the rules with patience. She snaps, nags, complains about extra work, and yet, she shows up, over and over. Her support is practical rather than emotional. Eat this. Work faster. Don't get noticed. That dynamic matters because it teaches Chihiro something essential. Care isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's blunt because survival doesn't leave room for softness. Lin embodies a version of adulthood shaped by labor-capable, cynical, but not cruel. Kamaji operates on a similar wavelength, but from a different emotional register. At first glance, he's pure obstruction, gruff, suspicious, territorial. But Miyazaki layers him carefully. Kamaji has built a life inside the machinery of the bathhouse, literally bound to its gears and routines. His kindness emerges sideways, through favors done begrudgingly, through lies told on Chihiro's behalf, through small acts of rebellion disguised as indifference. He doesn't mentor her with speeches, he protects her by bending rules. That quiet resistance gives the character depth and makes his eventual loyalty feel earned rather than sentimental. No Face is often misread as a villain or a cautionary symbol, but within the ensemble, he functions more like a mirror. He reflects the values of whatever environment he occupies. Inside the bathhouse's economy of excess, he becomes monstrous, consuming, volatile, defined entirely by appetite. Surrounded by generosity and restraint, he softens. What makes this work is how other characters respond to him. Most exploit his wealth. Some fear his size. Almost no one considers his loneliness. Chihiro's refusal to engage with his greed isn't heroic, it's instinctive. She simply doesn't want what he offers. That rejection, quiet and uncelebrated, becomes the turning point for his character. Yubaba dominates the ensemble through sheer presence. She fills space. Her energy dictates the rhythm of scenes she occupies. But what's fascinating is how limited her emotional range actually is. She understands control, contracts, leverage. She does not understand empathy. The bathhouse runs efficiently because she's ruthless, but it's spiritually bankrupt for the same reason. As a supporting character, Yubaba represents the endpoint of a life spent prioritizing power over connection. She's not a villain to defeat, she's a warning to observe. Zeniba complicates that warning. She lives outside the system, but not in opposition to it. Her home is modest, her magic is domestic, her power doesn't depend on domination. Within the ensemble, Zeniba offers an alternative adulthood, one rooted in patience, craft, and accountability. She forgives, but she doesn't erase consequences. That balance gives her scenes an unusual calm. The film doesn't argue that Zeniba is right and Yubaba is wrong. It suggests that environments shape ethics. Power hardens. Simplicity clarifies. Even minor spirits are treated with intention. The soot sprites, initially comic, introduce Chihiro to labor's monotony. They don't speak much, but their exhaustion is palpable. The frog workers embody mindless conformity, more concerned with status than safety. The radish spirit, silent and gentle, offers comfort without explanation. None of these characters overstay their welcome. They appear, fulfill their emotional purpose, and drift away. That economy of presence keeps the world feeling alive rather than crowded. What's striking about this ensemble is the absence of traditional comic relief. Humor exists, but it grows organically from character behavior rather than punchlines. The laughs don't interrupt tension, they release it. That restraint preserves tonal coherence. The film never winks at the audience. It trusts them to find humor in absurdity without being guided toward it. Ensemble balance is notoriously difficult in animation, where distinctive designs can easily overwhelm narrative focus. Spirited Away avoids that trap by anchoring every interaction to Chihiro's perspective. Supporting characters don't compete for attention, they refract her experience. Each one presents a possible future, a possible self. Cynical worker, isolated ruler, quiet craftsperson, empty consumer, lost wanderer. Chihiro moves among these options, learning not by judgment but by observation. By the time the story nears its end, the ensemble has done its work. Chihiro doesn't need to be told who she is. She's seen enough examples to choose for herself. That's the quiet triumph of the supporting cast. They don't steal the spotlight, but they build the stage on which transformation becomes possible. And once those characters were defined, emotionally, vocally, philosophically, the physical world around them had to rise to the same standard. Because a story, this dependent on atmosphere and observation, lives or dies by the credibility of its spaces. The next step is stepping inside those spaces themselves and understanding how Spirited Away constructs one of the most immersive animated worlds ever put on screen. The world of Spirited Away doesn't announce itself as fantasy. It invites you in quietly, then refuses to let you leave. That effect comes from production design so meticulous it feels less like invention and more like discovery. You don't feel as if Miyazaki designed the spirit world. You feel as if he remembered it. Every corridor, every doorway, every cluttered corner of the bathhouse suggests a past that existed long before Chihiro arrived and will continue long after she leaves. This isn't a backdrop. It's a functioning organism. The bathhouse is the film's architectural spine, and it's built on contradiction. Grand on the outside, suffocating on the inside. Opulent decorations coexist with cramped workspaces. Gold trims frame rotting wood. Lanterns glow warmly over exploitative labor. Production designer Yoji Takeshige constructs the space as a physical metaphor for consumer culture, seductive, overwhelming, and fundamentally indifferent to the individuals keeping it alive. You feel that contradiction immediately. The building dazzles, but it never feels safe. Miyazaki insisted on hand-drawn detail at a density most productions would consider excessive. Look at the background clutter: stacked towels, chipped tiles, soot-stained walls, mismatched pipes. These details aren't decorative, they're narrative. They communicate hierarchy. Guests move through polished halls. Workers vanish into narrow stairwells and boiler rooms. The design teaches you how power flows without a single line of dialogue. You understand who belongs where instinctively. Color plays a quiet but deliberate role. Early scenes favor muted, dusty tones. Browns, grays, washed-out greens, mirroring Chihiro's emotional disorientation. As she acclimates, color intensifies. Reds grow richer. Gold becomes oppressive rather than inviting. The bathhouse glows at night, but it's the glow of excess, not warmth. Miyazaki uses color not to beautify the world, but to complicate it. Even beauty has a cost here. Costume design reinforces identity loss and recovery. Chihiro's oversized work uniform erases her individuality. It hangs awkwardly, swallowing her frame, visually reinforcing how small she feels inside the system. As she grows more confident, the uniform doesn't change, but how she occupies it does. Her posture straightens, her movements sharpen. The design remains constant so the character can transform within it. That choice keeps the focus on internal change rather than external makeover. Yubaba's costume is the opposite. Heavy fabrics, excessive jewelry, layers upon layers of indulgence. She wears wealth like armor, and it weighs her down. Zeniba's clothing, by contrast, is simple, practical, unadorned. Same magical lineage, different priorities. Production design doesn't argue this contrast. It lets you see it. The spirit designs themselves walk a careful line between the familiar and the alien. Many are rooted in Japanese folklore, but Miyazaki never treats them as museum pieces. They're recontextualized through everyday behavior. Spirits cue. They complain, they tip, they overindulge. That normalization is key. The production design doesn't exoticize the spirit world, it bureaucratizes it. Magic operates under the same inefficiencies and inequalities as the human one. One of the most striking visual environments is the flooded plain crossed by the train. Minimalist, nearly abstract, it strips away clutter and forces stillness. The world opens up. Sky and water blur. Stations appear and disappear without explanation. This space exists outside productivity, outside consumption. Its design offers visual relief precisely because it rejects density. It's the only place where the film allows emptiness to breathe. That contrast retroactively makes the bathhouse feel even more oppressive. Props are treated with similar intentionality. Food glistens unnaturally, exaggerated in scale and texture, turning indulgence into something faintly grotesque. Paper contracts dominate key scenes, fragile yet absolute. Tokens, tickets, and seals govern movement. Even the smallest object carries consequence. The world operates on rules enforced by things, not ideals. Production design makes those rules tangible. What elevates all of this beyond technical excellence is cohesion. Nothing feels designed in isolation. Architecture informs behavior. Costumes inform posture. Props inform power dynamics. The world doesn't bend to the characters adapt to the world. That inversion is rare, especially in animation, where environments often exist to showcase protagonists. Here, Chihiro survives by reading the space correctly, by noticing which doors to avoid, which paths are forbidden, which places demand humility. This obsessive attention to visual logic ensures that even the most surreal moments feel grounded. You accept the impossible because the environment behaves consistently. And once that consistency is established, the camera can move through it with confidence, guiding your eye, shaping your emotional response, and revealing how much meaning can be embedded in a single frame. Because world building alone isn't enough. How you look at that world, where the camera lingers, what it withholds, how movement is framed, determines how deeply it resonates. To understand why Spirited Away feels so immersive, you have to look not just at what was built, but how it was seen. The camera in Spirited Away never rushes. It observes. It waits. It watches characters move through space as if the world existed before the lens arrived and would continue after it left. That philosophy defines the film's visual language. Miyazaki doesn't use cinematography to impress. He uses it to orient. Every shot answers a quiet question, where are we? And how small do we feel inside it? Unlike live-action cinema, animation gives total control over the camera. Miyazaki responds by exercising restraint. The virtual camera rarely calls attention to itself. No dizzying swoops, no exaggerated perspectives unless the story demands it. Most shots sit at human eye level, grounding even the most fantastical imagery in something bodily and familiar. You don't float above the world. You walk through it with Chihiro. Composition does much of the emotional work. Chihiro is frequently framed at the edge of the image or dwarfed by architecture. Doorways loom, ceilings press down, hallways stretch too long. These aren't random design choices, they're psychological framing. The camera reinforces Chihiro's lack of control by placing her within environments that refuse to accommodate her. When she grows more confident, the framing shifts subtly. She occupies the center more often. The spaces don't shrink, but her relationship to them changes. Movement is sparing, which makes it meaningful when it arrives. The bathhouse is full of lateral motion characters crossing frame, sliding doors opening and closing, machinery humming in repetitive cycles. This horizontal flow creates a sense of labor without progress, motion without escape. By contrast, vertical movement carries narrative weight. Elevators descend into boiler rooms. Stairs climb toward Yubaba's office. Power, literally, sits above. The camera tracks these vertical journeys with care, letting height and depth communicate hierarchy. One of Miyazaki's most effective techniques is the use of pillow shots, brief, quiet images of empty spaces or environmental detail. A hallway after footsteps fade, steam rising from water, curtains stirring in still air. These moments don't advance plot, but they deepen immersion. They allow the viewer to breathe, to absorb the world as a place rather than a stage. In a lesser film, they'd be trimmed. Here, they're essential. They make the world feel inhabited rather than illustrated. Lighting is deceptively simple. There's no aggressive chiaroscuro, no dramatic spotlighting. Light sources are practical lanterns, windows, bathwater glow. The illumination feels motivated, which helps sell the reality of the space. When scenes turn dark, it's because light has been removed, not because danger needs underlining. Shadows fall naturally, obscuring information without theatrical flair. You're never told what to feel by lighting alone, you're invited to discover it. The train sequence stands apart as a masterclass in visual restraint. The camera stays mostly fixed. The horizon barely shifts. Reflections ripple across the flooded plain, blurring sky and earth. Characters sit silently, framed in profile, their faces reflected in glass. There's almost no motion, yet the scene vibrates with emotion. This is cinematography as meditation. The lack of visual urgency forces introspection. You don't watch this scene, you inhabit it. Editing rhythm complements this approach. Cuts are purposeful, never frantic. Miyazaki allows shots to play out fully, trusting the audience to read them. When cuts do come quickly during moments of chaos or danger, they feel invasive, almost stressful, because they break the established calm. The contrast heightens tension without relying on spectacle. You feel disruption because the film has taught you what stillness feels like. Perspective is another subtle tool. Adults and authority figures are often framed from slightly lower angles, emphasizing scale and dominance. Chihiro, especially early on, is frequently seen from above, reinforcing vulnerability. As her journey progresses, the camera meets her more often at eye level. This isn't announced, it's felt. By the end, when she stands calmly before Yubaba, the framing no longer diminishes her. The world hasn't changed, she has. What makes the cinematography so effective is how inseparable it is from theme. Identity, labor, and agency aren't discussed, they're visualized. You see how systems dwarf individuals. You feel how repetition drains spirit. You notice how stillness creates space for memory. The camera isn't neutral, it's ethical. It sides with observation over domination, patience over control. And because the visuals refuse to overwhelm, they leave room for another crucial layer to do its work. Sound, music, silence. The emotional undercurrent that flows beneath these images, guiding feeling without forcing it, arrives not through spectacle, but through resonance. Because once the world is built, and once we know how to look at it, the final step is learning how to listen. Music in Spirited Away doesn't announce emotion, it seeps into it. Joe Hisaishi's score doesn't chase scenes or underlying beats. It lingers. It waits. It understands that this story isn't about triumph, but endurance, and so the music rarely swells in victory. Instead, it breathes alongside the characters, shaping an emotional landscape that feels internal rather than imposed. Hisaishi and Miyazaki had already built a long creative shorthand by 2001, but this score marks a shift toward restraint. Earlier collaborations often leaned into sweeping melodic statements. Here, the compositions are simpler, almost fragile. Piano lines repeat with slight variation. Strings hover rather than soar. Themes don't resolve cleanly, they circle. That circularity mirrors Chihiro's experience. She isn't moving toward glory, she's trying not to disappear. The central theme, often associated with Chihiro herself, is deceptively plain, a gentle piano motif, sparse and unadorned. It doesn't insist on importance. It feels tentative, searching. Early in the film, the theme sounds uncertain, as if it doesn't fully believe in its own melody. As Chihiro grows more grounded, the arrangement subtly fills out, not louder, just steadier. The music matures the same way she does, quietly, without ceremony. Hisaishi uses repetition as emotional architecture. Familiar motifs return in different contexts, reframed by new surroundings. What once sounded anxious later sounds reflective. What felt lonely begins to feel resolute. This isn't transformation through escalation, it's transformation through familiarity. The music learns alongside the audience, accumulating meaning through association rather than declaration. Silence is just as important as score. Miyazaki is fearless about letting scenes play without musical guidance. Footsteps echo, water sloshes, wind moves through empty space. These sounds ground the film in physical reality, preventing it from drifting into abstraction. Silence here isn't absence, it's texture. It forces attention inward. You're not told how to feel. You're left alone with the moment. The sound design reinforces that philosophy. The bathhouse hums constantly. Pipes hiss, floors creak, doors slide, water churns. It's never quiet because labor never stops. That sonic density creates low-grade stress, a sense of being trapped inside a machine that doesn't care who's inside it. When Chihiro steps away from that environment, the relief is immediate and almost physical. Fewer sounds, wider space. The world exhales. The train sequence is the clearest example of sound and image working in perfect alignment. The score here is restrained to the point of transparency. Soft piano notes drift in and out, leaving room for the rhythm of the train itself. The clack of wheels becomes percussive. Water laps against invisible edges. Silence stretches between notes. Time slows. The effect is hypnotic. You're not watching a journey, you're processing one. Diegetic and non-diegetic sound blur throughout the film. Music often feels like it's emanating from the world rather than sitting on top of it. Bathhouse festivities bleed into score. Environmental noise carries emotional weight. This blending keeps the fantasy grounded. Magic doesn't interrupt reality here. It coexists with it. Hisaishi also resists assigning grand, villainous themes. Yubaba doesn't get a bombastic musical signature. Her presence is marked more by rhythm than melody. Busy, cluttered, slightly oppressive. That choice aligns with her characterization. She isn't an embodiment of evil, she's an embodiment of excess. The music reflects that through density rather than menace. No Face's sonic identity is similarly restrained. There's no horror sting, no overt signal of threat. His presence is often accompanied by subtle, unsettling tonal shifts, low frequencies, hollow resonance, space where sound should be. The discomfort comes from absence and distortion rather than aggression. When No Face calms, the soundscape relaxes with him, not through melody, but through quiet. One of the score's most powerful qualities is its refusal to resolve too neatly. Even in moments of safety, there's a lingering melancholy. Hisaishi understands that growing up is bittersweet by nature. You gain stability, but you lose something indefinable in the process. The music honors that loss without dramatizing. It lets sadness exist alongside relief. What makes this audio landscape so enduring is its humility. The music doesn't compete with the visuals. It doesn't demand attention. It supports, frames, and occasionally steps aside. That confidence allows emotion to arise organically from image and sound working in tandem rather than fighting for dominance. And once all of these elements, image, movement, music, silence, come together, the question becomes how such a carefully balanced film was actually made. Because behind this calm, immersive experience lies a production process filled with uncertainty, risk, and creative strain. To understand the film's quiet power, you have to step behind the scenes and see how close it came to chaos. By the time Spirited Away reached completion, it felt effortless on screen. Behind the scenes, it was anything but. The film's production was defined by uncertainty, creative, logistical, even existential. Miyazaki didn't just risk the studio's resources, he risked its identity. This was his first feature made entirely in the digital era of distribution, while remaining stubbornly rooted in hand-drawn tradition. The process tested everyone involved, including the director himself. Production began without a completed script, a fact that still makes executives shudder. Miyazaki worked from evolving storyboards, sometimes finishing sequences only weeks before they were needed. Animators would begin work knowing the emotional destination of a scene, but not always its final context. That approach demanded trust. It also demanded stamina. Studio Ghibli's artists weren't just executing instructions. They were collaborators in an ongoing act of discovery. The schedule stretched. Pressure mounted. Miyazaki was infamous for revising scenes after they were already animated, chasing emotional truth over efficiency. Entire sequences were redrawn because they felt too explanatory, too tidy. He wanted friction, ambiguity, spaces where the audience had to lean forward. That insistence slowed production, but it also protected the film's identity. Shortcuts were rejected even when time was scarce. Technology added another layer of complexity. While Spirited Away embraced digital coloring and compositing, Miyazaki resisted full digital animation. Characters and backgrounds were still hand-drawn, scanned, and then digitally processed. This hybrid workflow was labor-intensive and, at the time, risky. Mistakes were harder to correct. Pipelines were still evolving. The choice wasn't nostalgic, it was philosophical. Miyazaki believed that the tactile imperfections of hand-drawn lines carried humanity that purely digital animation couldn't replicate. He was willing to suffer for that belief. The bathhouse alone required extraordinary coordination. Its layered architecture meant animating multiple planes of action simultaneously. Foreground labor, midground movement, background atmosphere. Animators had to track spatial logic across scenes to ensure consistency. A staircase seen from one angle had to align perfectly when revisited later. This wasn't just visual continuity, it was world integrity. Any inconsistency risked breaking immersion. Miyazaki's on-set, more accurately, in-studio style was demanding but deeply engaged. He didn't hover as a distant auteur. He drew alongside his team, corrected frames personally, and challenged choices face to face. That intensity was exhausting, but it also created shared ownership. Animators weren't just executing Miyazaki's vision, they were helping refine it. The film's cohesion reflects that collective investment. There were moments of real concern. Miyazaki's health had already suffered during Princess Mononoke, and the stress here was no lighter. Yet something about Spirited Away energized him differently. This wasn't a film driven by anger or confrontation. It was reflective, observational. That tone seemed to sustain him even as deadlines loomed. One of the most revealing behind-the-scenes stories involves No Face. The character's role expanded gradually as Miyazaki responded to how he felt on screen. There was no grand plan. Scenes were added because they felt right, because the character had more to say through behavior than dialogue. In a more rigid production, that evolution would have been impossible. Here, it became central. When the film finally premiered, there was no certainty about its reception. It didn't resemble conventional animated hits. It lacked obvious merchandising hooks. Its pacing was contemplative. Its heroine was intentionally unglamorous. Studio Ghibli released it anyway, trusting that audiences, especially children, were capable of patience and curiosity. That trust was rewarded beyond expectation. But the true success of Spirited Away isn't measured only by accolades or numbers. It's measured by how completely the film's quiet confidence survived a chaotic creation process. Against every industrial instinct pushing towards simplification, Miyazaki doubled down on complexity, slowness, and respect for the viewer. And once the film left the studio, the next question wasn't artistic. It was commercial. How would a film this unconventional perform in a marketplace increasingly dominated by spectacle? The answer would reshape not just Studio Ghibli's future, but the global perception of animated cinema. When Spirited Away arrived in Japanese theaters in July 2001, expectations were cautious rather than euphoric. Studio Ghibli had prestige, yes, but prestige doesn't automatically translate into mass appeal, especially for a film this strange, this patient, this uninterested in spectacle for spectacle's sake. There were no celebrity voices being marketed, no pop songs engineered for radio play, no easy hook beyond Miyazaki's name. And yet, what followed was not just success, but a quiet reshaping of what commercial success in animation could look like. The film didn't explode out of the gate with hype-driven urgency. It built momentum the way the story itself does, steadily, insistently, through word of mouth. Audiences didn't rush to see it because they were told to. They came back because they wanted to. Families returned. Adults came without children. Viewers who expected a conventional fantasy found themselves recommending something far stranger and deeper than anticipated. Attendance grew not through marketing muscle, but through trust. Domestically, the results were historic. Spirited Away became the highest-grossing film ever released in Japan at the time, surpassing records that had stood for decades. This wasn't just an animation milestone, it was a cultural one. A hand-drawn fantasy about labor, identity, and spiritual erosion outperformed blockbuster franchises and live-action juggernauts. That fact alone forced a re-evaluation of what Japanese audiences were willing to support when given something uncompromised. What makes this achievement even more striking is how uncommercial the film's priorities seem on paper. There's no romantic subplot driving repeat viewings, no action-heavy climax engineered for adrenaline. The heroine doesn't win in a traditional sense. The ending is reflective, even melancholic. And yet audiences connected deeply. The box office performance revealed something studios often forget. Emotional sincerity creates longevity. People didn't just like Spirited Away, they lived with it. Internationally, the film followed a slower, more complicated path. Animated features, rooted in Japanese cultural specificity, had rarely broken through globally at that scale. Distribution was cautious. Marketing struggled to frame the film without flattening it. But once it reached wider audiences, particularly after critical recognition, it found its footing. Viewers who might never have sought out an anime film discovered it through reputation rather than promotion. Home media played a crucial role in expanding its reach. DVD sales were substantial, driven by repeat viewing and cross-generational appeal. This wasn't a one-and-done experience. The film invited revisits. Details emerged on second and third viewings. Parents noticed themes their children missed. Children absorbed atmosphere long before meaning. That replay value translated directly into sustained commercial life beyond theaters. Merchandising existed, but it never overshadowed the film. Unlike franchise-driven animation, Spirited Away didn't rely on toys or brand extensions to justify its success. Its financial strength came from the film itself. That distinction matters. It demonstrated that animation could thrive without being reduced to a product ecosystem. Perhaps most importantly, the film's success recalibrated Studio Ghibli's position in the industry. It wasn't just a respected studio anymore, it was a commercial force capable of competing with global giants on its own terms. That leverage protected future projects from excessive compromise. Miyazaki earned not just acclaim, but autonomy. The industry took notice. Executives who once viewed animation as a genre for children were forced to confront a different reality. Here was a film with no obvious demographic targeting outperforming carefully engineered blockbusters. It didn't simplify to expand. It trusted to connect. And audiences rewarded that trust. But numbers, no matter how impressive, don't tell the full story. Box office measures attention, not impact. To understand why Spirited Away continues to matter decades later, you have to look at how critics, artists, and audiences responded, not just at release, but over time. Because some films succeed financially, others succeed culturally. A rare few do both and redefine the conversation in the process. Critical response to Spirited Away didn't arrive as a polite consensus. It arrived as recognition. Almost immediately, reviewers sensed they were dealing with something that resisted standard evaluation. This wasn't just a great animated film. It was something rarer, a work that made critics recalibrate their language. Praise centered not on novelty or technique, but on feeling, on the strange emotional clarity the film produced without explaining itself. Japanese critics responded first, and with unusual unanimity. Reviews focused on Miyazaki's empathy for children without condescension, and his willingness to depict labor, fear, and confusion as formative rather than traumatic. The film was widely read as a mirror held up to contemporary Japan, a society grappling with economic stagnation, lost identity, and generational drift. Chihiro's struggle to retain her name resonated deeply in a culture where corporate conformity often erodes individuality. The film didn't lecture, it observed. That restraint earned trust. International critics followed with equal enthusiasm, though from a different angle. Many Western reviews framed Spirited Away as a corrective, a reminder of what animation could be when freed from formula. Critics, accustomed to clear moral binaries and kinetic pacing, found themselves disarmed by the film's ambiguity. The absence of a traditional villain, the lack of narrative urgency, the quiet ending, these were not seen as weaknesses, but as acts of confidence. Reviewers repeatedly returned to the same idea. This film respects its audience. Awards attention solidified that perception. The film didn't just win. It crossed boundaries rarely crossed by animated features. When it received the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, it wasn't treated as a genre victory. It was treated as validation. Not because animation needed legitimacy, but because Spirited Away demonstrated that emotional and thematic sophistication had nothing to do with medium. That moment marked a shift in global discourse around animated cinema. Yet what's most fascinating about the film's reception is how little backlash it generated. Even dissenting voices tended to focus on taste rather than quality. Some viewers found the pacing slow. Others struggled with the lack of explicit explanation. But these critiques rarely framed the film as flawed, just demanding. And over time, many of those early reservations softened. Rewatching revealed structure beneath the drift, intention beneath the quiet. Audience response mirrored that evolution. Children often responded first to mood rather than meaning. The imagery stuck. The train, the bathhouse, no face. Years later, those same viewers returned as adults and found different resonances. Work culture, identity erosion, emotional labor. Few films grow with their audience so completely. That intergenerational dialogue became part of the film's cultural footprint. The film's influence spread beyond criticism into creative circles. Filmmakers cited it as proof that pacing could be contemplative without losing engagement. Animators pointed to its world-building as a benchmark for cohesion. Storytellers across media referenced its trust in silence and observation. Its fingerprints appeared not through imitation, but permission. The permission to slow down, to refuse explanation, to let atmosphere carry meaning. Online discourse amplified that legacy. Fan interpretations flourished, not because the film was obscure, but because it was open. Symbolism around No Face, the bathhouse, and the spirit world sparked endless discussion. Importantly, Miyazaki never confirmed or denied most readings. He allowed the film to belong to its viewers. That generosity sustained its relevance long after initial release cycles faded. What began as critical acclaim matured into cultural permanence. Spirited Away moved from being one of Miyazaki's best to being a reference point, a film invoked when discussing childhood, labor, environmental loss, or the capacity of animation to hold complexity. Its reputation didn't spike and decline, it settled. It endured, and endurance is the final measure of reception. Awards fade, records fall. What remains is influence and memory. To understand why Spirited Away continues to feel alive decades later, you have to step back from numbers and reviews and confront what the film is actually saying and why those ideas refuse to age. At its core, Spirited Away is a film about erosion and the quiet, stubborn work required to resist it. Not erosion of landscapes, though that's present. Not erosion of tradition, though that hums in the background. The deeper fear Miyazaki circles is the erosion of self. How easily identity dissolves when systems value productivity over personhood. How quickly names become labels, roles become cages, and survival demands forgetting who you were before the work began. Chihiro's journey isn't about becoming brave in a conventional sense. It's about learning to remain herself in an environment designed to strip that away. The loss of her name is not a fantasy flourish, it's the film's most precise metaphor. Once renamed, she works harder, moves faster, obeys more completely, she becomes useful. And usefulness, Miyazaki suggests, is seductive. It promises safety at the cost of memory. The real danger of the spirit world isn't monsters, it's comfort without identity. Labor sits at the heart of the film's thematic engine. Work isn't demonized, it's necessary, grounding, even dignifying at times. What's critiqued is work divorced from meaning. The bathhouse functions flawlessly, yet nothing within it feels fulfilled. Workers survive, but they don't grow. Guests indulge, but they're never satisfied. The system feeds itself endlessly, producing motion without progress. Chihiro doesn't escape by rejecting work. She escapes by refusing to let work define her worth. Environmental themes surface not as lectures, but as consequences. The polluted river spirit isn't a symbol, it's a result. Garbage has weight. Neglect has form. Healing requires effort, not apology. Miyazaki doesn't frame nature as pure or fragile. He frames it as resilient but patient only up to a point. Restoration is possible, but it's labor-intensive and collective. You don't save the river alone, you keep pulling. Consumption appears throughout the film as a trap, disguised as reward. Chihiro's parents gorge themselves and lose their humanity. No face consumes to fill absence and becomes monstrous. The bathhouse exists to satisfy endless appetite, yet produces nothing nourishing in return. Against this excess, Miyazaki places restraint, modest meals, simple homes, quiet generosity. The film never romanticizes poverty, but it does question abundance without purpose. Memory is the film's most fragile currency. Characters forget who they are, where they came from, what they loved. Recovery doesn't arrive through revelation, it arrives through recognition. A name remembered, a river recalled, a kindness repeated. Memory here is resistance. To remember is to assert continuity in a world built on replacement. That's why the film's final test isn't a battle. It's a question. Do you know what you're looking at? Do you trust yourself enough to answer? Miyazaki's legacy is often framed through craft, and rightly so, but Spirited Away endures because of its worldview. It refuses cynicism without embracing naivete. It acknowledges cruelty without surrendering to it. It doesn't promise that adulthood is kind. It suggests that kindness is a choice you make repeatedly, often without recognition. That perspective feels increasingly rare. The film's influence is everywhere, even when unspoken. You see it in animated works that slow their pacing and trust atmosphere. You hear it in filmmakers who allow silence to carry weight. You feel it in stories that center observation over conquest. But Spirited Away hasn't been replaced because it wasn't built to be timely. It was built to be patient. Rewatching the film years later reveals a strange inversion. As a child, you're absorbed by fear and wonder. As an adult, you're undone by familiarity. The bathhouse no longer feels fantastical. It feels recognizable. The systems make sense. The exhaustion feels earned. And Chihiro's small acts of integrity feel monumental. The film doesn't change. You do. That's why Spirited Away resists finality. It doesn't end with triumph. It ends with departure. The world remains. The system persists. Chihiro leaves changed, but not invincible. She will forget some things. That's inevitable. What matters is that she remembers enough. Enough to step forward without shrinking. Enough to carry herself through the next threshold. As a piece of cinema, Spirited Away stands among the most fully realized animated films ever made. Not because it dazzles, but because it listens. It listens to children without idealizing them. It listens to adults without flattering them. It listens to silence, to labor, to loss, to the quiet courage required to remain human in places that reward forgetting. That's its legacy. Not spectacle, not nostalgia. Recognition. And once you've seen it, really seen it, you don't leave unchanged either. What happens after a masterpiece settles into canon is often more revealing than its initial impact. Films that truly endure don't stay fixed. They evolve as the world around them changes. Spirited Away has done exactly that. 2 decades on, it no longer reads only as a coming-of-age fantasy. It reads as a diagnostic tool. Each generation sees a different wound reflected back at them, and that adaptability is the clearest sign of lasting relevance. In the early 2000s, audiences read the film through the lens of economic anxiety and cultural dislocation. Japan was navigating the aftermath of the asset bubble collapse, and the bathhouse felt like an allegory for a society stuck in endless maintenance mode. Today, the reading shifts. The bathhouse now feels eerily like late-stage global capitalism, an ecosystem where labor is constant, identity is transactional, and exhaustion is normalized. The film didn't change. The context did, and suddenly, it feels even sharper. Chihiro's struggle to retain her name resonates differently now. In an era of digital identities, algorithmic sorting, and performative productivity, the fear of becoming a function rather than a person feels immediate. Yubaba's contracts don't just represent exploitation anymore. They resemble modern terms of service. You sign without reading. You comply to participate. You trade autonomy for access. The genius of the film is that it predicted this emotional reality without predicting the technology itself. The bathhouse workers, once seen as quirky background figures, now read as painfully familiar, overworked, under-recognized, adapted to systems they no longer question because questioning would cost too much. Their lack of overt rebellion isn't moral failure, it's fatigue. Miyazaki understood something that many political narratives miss. Most people don't surrender their agency dramatically. They misplace it slowly, one compromise at a time. No Face has undergone the most dramatic reinterpretation over time. Early readings framed him as a metaphor for greed or loneliness. Today, he feels like something else entirely, a consumer without identity, absorbing whatever environment feeds him. He mimics language without meaning. He offers value without connection. In a social media-saturated world, No Face looks less like a spirit and more like a warning. Attention without selfhood becomes hunger, and hunger, left unchecked, becomes destructive. Even the film's pacing has gained new power. What once felt slow now feels radical. In an age of accelerated editing, constant stimulation, and narrative over-explanation, Spirited Away's patience feels almost confrontational. It demands presence. It refuses to multitask. The film doesn't reward distraction. It exposes it. Miss a quiet moment, and you lose emotional information. That requirement turns watching into participation. What's remarkable is how younger audiences continue to connect with the film without needing it to be updated or explained. Children today don't experience it as old-fashioned. They experience it as immersive. The absence of constant dialogue creates space for projection. Fear doesn't need to be spelled out. Wonder doesn't need commentary. The film trusts imagination. And imagination, it turns out, hasn't evolved out of relevance. This ongoing reinterpretation reveals something essential about Miyazaki's approach. He didn't design Spirited Away to answer questions. He designed it to hold them. That's why it ages forward rather than backward. It doesn't lock meaning into a specific era. It lets meaning accumulate. And that accumulation leads us somewhere deeper, beyond cultural impact, and into the film's quiet psychological mechanics. Because beneath the folklore, beneath the labor allegory, beneath the environmental warnings, Spirited Away is doing something far more intimate. It's mapping how a child learns to regulate fear, responsibility, and empathy without losing softness. Fear in Spirited Away is never treated as something to be conquered. It's something to be negotiated. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Most children's films frame fear as an obstacle to overcome on the way to empowerment. Miyazaki frames it as a constant companion, one that never disappears, but can be understood, managed, and lived alongside. This is why the film feels strangely therapeutic rather than traumatic, even when it's frightening. Chihiro doesn't become fearless by the end. She becomes regulated. Early fear overwhelms her nervous system. Her body shuts down. She cries, freezes, loses focus. These are not cinematic panic attacks designed for drama. They're accurate depictions of childhood stress. Miyazaki allows these moments to linger just long enough to be uncomfortable. He doesn't rush to reassure. And that honesty builds trust. The film says, without words, this feeling is real, and you're not wrong for having it. What's crucial is how Chihiro learns to move through fear rather than erase it. Notice how often she's given small, concrete tasks. Carry this. Clean that. Remember this name. Fear is addressed through action, not affirmation. The film understands that children don't calm down because they're told everything will be okay. They calm down because they're given something manageable to do. Control returns in fragments, one step, then another. The bathhouse itself becomes a psychological landscape. Loud, chaotic, unpredictable. Exactly how a new environment feels to a child under stress. Adults tower. Rules shift without explanation. Punishment feels arbitrary. Sound overwhelms. Miyazaki isn't inventing a fantasy hellscape. He's externalizing a mental state. That's why the fear feels personal rather than abstract. You've been here before, even if you've never seen a spirit. The film is also careful not to equate fear with weakness. Characters who suppress emotion, Yubaba most of all, aren't models of strength. They're brittle. Their power depends on control, and control depends on denial. Chihiro's fear, by contrast, keeps her attentive. She notices details others ignore. She listens. She remembers. Fear sharpens her awareness instead of blinding it. That inversion is quietly radical. Even No-Face operates within this psychological framework. His hunger isn't aggression, it's dysregulation. He consumes because he doesn't know how else to exist. When Chihiro refuses him, she isn't punishing him. She's setting a boundary. That boundary stabilizes him. The film frames limits not as cruelty, but as care. A lesson many adults still struggle to learn. The absence of a traditional climactic confrontation reinforces this emotional philosophy. There's no moment where fear is defeated. The final challenge is perceptual, not combative. Can Chihiro see clearly under pressure? Can she trust her internal sense of truth when authority demands compliance? That's anxiety at its most mature form, not terror, but doubt. And Chihiro passes not because she's bold, but because she's centered. This psychological realism is why the film feels safe even when it's unsettling. It doesn't traumatize because it doesn't abandon the child emotionally. It stays with her. It validates fear without glorifying it. And in doing so, it offers something rare, a model of emotional growth that doesn't rely on domination or denial, which leads to a deeper structural question. How does a film this loose, this dreamlike, maintain coherence without collapsing into randomness? Why does it feel intuitive even when it refuses explanation? The answer lies in a hidden narrative architecture that most viewers sense but can't articulate, and it's one of Miyazaki's most sophisticated achievements. What makes Spirited Away feel coherent, even inevitable, despite its wandering structure, is that it isn't built on plot mechanics. It's built on state changes. The film doesn't ask, what happens next? It asks, who is Chihiro now? Each sequence exists to shift her internal condition, not to advance an external objective. That's why the story feels intuitive even when it resists explanation. You're not tracking events, you're tracking balance. Think of the film less as a straight line and more as a series of thresholds. Every major moment moves Chihiro from one psychological state to another. Dependence to initiative, panic to focus, isolation to connection, confusion to recognition. The order matters, but not in a cause and effect sense. It matters because growth has prerequisites. You can't remember who you are if you haven't learned to pay attention. You can't help others if you haven't learned to endure discomfort. Miyazaki structures the narrative around these emotional prerequisites rather than traditional beats. This is why the film feels dreamlike without being arbitrary. Dreams don't unfold logically, but they do unfold meaningfully. One image leads to another because the mind is processing something unresolved. Spirited Away follows that same logic. Scenes don't connect because of plot necessity. They connect because Chihiro isn't finished with what the last one taught her. The bathhouse doesn't throw challenges at random. It responds to her readiness. Even the film's episodic quality serves this architecture. Each episode isolates a lesson without announcing it as one. Cleaning the bath, riding the elevator, boarding the train. None of these are framed as turning points, and yet, remove any one of them, and the structure collapses. The film's meaning doesn't reside in singular moments. It accumulates across repetition and variation. The audience learns the rules of this emotional world the same way Chihiro does, by living in it. Miyazaki also uses contrast as structural glue. Loud scenes are followed by quiet ones. Crowded frames give way to emptiness. High-pressure interactions are relieved by stillness. This rhythm prevents fatigue and mirrors emotional regulation. Stress rises, then settles, over and over. The pattern trains the viewer's nervous system alongside the protagonists. That's why the film feels immersive rather than overwhelming. It modulates. Another hidden structural element is reversal without negation. When something changes, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. The bathhouse remains oppressive, but Chihiro navigates it differently. No-Face remains hungry, but his hunger shifts direction. Haku remains lost, but his loss becomes conscious. Nothing resets. Everything carries forward. This continuity gives the dream weight. Actions echo. Kindness compounds. Neglect corrodes. The film also avoids climax in favor of integration. Instead of building toward a single explosive moment, it spreads resolution across multiple recognitions. Haku remembers his name. No-Face finds calm. Chihiro trusts her perception. None of these moments dominate the others. Together, they form completion. The story ends not because something is defeated, but because enough has been understood. This structural philosophy explains why the ending feels right without feeling triumphant. The film doesn't close a loop, it opens a door. Chihiro leaves changed, but the world remains unresolved. That ambiguity isn't a flaw, it's the final structural choice. Growth doesn't conclude systems. It equips you to move through them. What's extraordinary is how invisible all of this feels. You don't sense the architecture while watching, you sense flow. That's the mark of mastery. The structure doesn't announce itself because it's aligned with human experience. We don't grow through plot, we grow through exposure, repetition, and quiet recognition. And this brings us to the final layer of the film's endurance. The reason it continues to feel emotionally honest rather than intellectually clever. Spirited Away doesn't just depict growth. It models a worldview where ambiguity is not a failure of storytelling, but a requirement for truth. Which leads to the final continuation. Why Miyazaki's refusal to explain, his insistence on leaving space, may be the film's most radical and lasting contribution. Miyazaki's ambiguity isn't decorative. It isn't mystery for mystery's sake. It's a moral position. Spirited Away refuses to explain itself because Miyazaki fundamentally distrusts explanation as a substitute for understanding. Explanation closes doors. Ambiguity keeps them open. And in a film about identity, memory, and growth, closing doors would be a betrayal. Modern cinema often treats clarity as kindness. Spell everything out. Resolve every thread. Translate emotion into dialogue so no one gets lost. Miyazaki rejects that logic entirely. He believes that being overly explicit doesn't protect the audience. It infantilizes them. Children, especially, don't need constant clarification. They need space to feel, to question, to sit with uncertainty long enough for meaning to form naturally. This is why Spirited Away never explains the spirit world's rules in full. Why certain spirits exist and others don't. Why magic works one way here and another way there. The film understands that systems don't usually explain themselves to those trapped inside them. You learn by watching, by misstepping, by adapting. Ambiguity isn't confusion, it's accuracy. Consider how the film handles morality. There are no speeches about right and wrong, no ethical scorecard. Characters behave according to context rather than alignment. Yubaba loves her baby. Zeniba sets firm boundaries. No Face is neither villain nor victim. These contradictions aren't puzzles to solve, they're conditions to accept. The film doesn't ask you to judge these characters, it asks you to observe them. That observational stance is deeply human. This refusal to moralize is why the film avoids villains in the traditional sense. Evil here isn't personified, it's structural. Contracts, hierarchies, incentives, appetite. These forces don't wear black cloaks, they wear routines. That's harder to dramatize, but far more honest. By leaving these forces unnamed, Miyazaki avoids simplifying them into something conquerable. You can't defeat a system with a sword. You navigate it with awareness. Ambiguity also protects emotional authenticity. When films explain too much, they tell you how to feel. Spirited Away doesn't do that. It creates emotional conditions and trusts the viewer to respond. Fear isn't labeled, sadness isn't underlined, relief isn't celebrated loudly. These feelings emerge organically. And because they're not prescribed, they feel personal. You don't feel manipulated. You feel invited. This approach frustrates some viewers, and that frustration is part of the point. Discomfort reveals expectation. When someone asks, "But what did it mean?" Miyazaki's answer, implicit in the film, is, "What did you feel?" Meaning isn't hidden behind the narrative. It's generated through engagement. The film doesn't withhold answers because it's obscure. It withholds them because answers aren't universal. In an era where media increasingly spoon-feeds interpretation through exposition, commentary, even post-release explanations, Spirited Away feels almost defiant. Miyazaki famously resisted explaining his symbolism in interviews, insisting that overinterpretation could suffocate imagination. He didn't want audiences decoding the film like a riddle. He wanted them living inside it. This philosophy is why the film remains endlessly discussable without ever being exhaustible. Every viewing surfaces different details because the film isn't trying to arrive at a single conclusion. It's holding space for evolving perception. Children experience it viscerally. Adults experience it reflectively. Neither experience cancels the other. They coexist. Ambiguity here is not a lack of control. It's an act of respect. Respect for the audience's intelligence, respect for emotional complexity, respect for the idea that not everything meaningful can be summarized. That stance is increasingly rare, and increasingly valuable. Which brings us to the final continuation. Because beyond themes, structure, psychology, and ambiguity lies the most enduring question of all. Why does Spirited Away continue to feel necessary? Not just beloved, necessary. What does it offer that modern storytelling keeps forgetting? That answer lives at the intersection of gentleness and courage, and it's where Miyazaki's work ultimately leaves us. What ultimately makes Spirited Away feel necessary even now isn't nostalgia or technical mastery. It's the way the film offers a model of strength that modern storytelling keeps sidelining. Not dominance, not optimization, not victory, but gentle endurance. The courage to remain open in systems that reward hardness, speed, and self-erasure. Chihiro survives not by becoming exceptional, but by becoming present. She notices when others don't. She remembers when forgetting would be easier. She helps without calculating return. These are not flashy virtues. They don't scale. They don't trend. And yet, they're exactly what feels endangered in contemporary life. The film doesn't glorify these traits. It simply shows that without them, nothing humane survives. Modern narratives often equate growth with escalation, louder emotions, bigger confrontations, clearer identities. Spirited Away moves in the opposite direction. Growth here is subtractive. Chihiro sheds panic, defensiveness, the need for constant reassurance. She doesn't gain power, she gains clarity. By the end, she speaks less but means more. That trajectory feels almost radical now, in a culture that equates selfhood with constant assertion. The film's gentleness is frequently mistaken for softness. It isn't. Gentleness here is disciplined. It requires restraint, attention, and moral stamina. It's harder to stay kind than to become cruel. Harder to stay curious than to become cynical. Harder to remember than to forget. Spirited Away understands that these are not passive states. They're active choices, renewed daily. This is why the film resonates so deeply with viewers facing burnout, alienation, and emotional fatigue. It doesn't promise escape. It doesn't offer revolution. It offers navigation, a way of moving through hostile systems without internal collapse, a way of working without disappearing, a way of growing up without calcifying. That's not fantasy, that's survival wisdom. Even the ending reinforces this necessity. There's no assurance that Chihiro's future will be easy. The road ahead is unknown. The world hasn't been fixed. But she steps forward without shrinking. She carries what matters with her. That image, quiet, unresolved, forward-moving, feels more honest than any triumphant finale could. Miyazaki once said he didn't want to make films that told children how the world should be. He wanted to make films that helped them live in the world as it is. That philosophy saturates every frame of Spirited Away. It doesn't anesthetize pain. It contextualizes it. It doesn't deny fear. It teaches coexistence. It doesn't offer certainty. It offers trust. In the viewer, in growth, in the slow accumulation of understanding. That trust is what modern storytelling often forgets. The assumption now is that audiences need clarity, speed, and constant reinforcement. Spirited Away proves the opposite. It proves that people, children especially, are capable of sitting with ambiguity, absorbing atmosphere, and finding meaning without being told where to look. The film doesn't demand attention. It earns it. And that's why it endures. Not because it's flawless, not because it's untouchable, but because it remains emotionally honest in a world increasingly hostile to honesty that can't be monetized or simplified. You don't leave Spirited Away with answers. You leave with orientation. A sense of how to stand, how to move, how to keep your name intact when everything around you tries to rename you. That's not just art, that's guidance. And that's why, years later, the film doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like a companion,